In the early 20th century, New York authorities realized an absurd situation. The wealthiest woman in the world lived in their city, owning entire blocks of Manhattan. Yet the Treasury received almost a cent from her. Hetty Green had turned tax evasion into a fine art. She had no permanent home. She lived in cheap furnished rooms in Brooklyn or Hoboken under assumed names like Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Robinson. As soon as the tax bloodhounds picked up her scent, Hetty would pack her belongings into old bundles within the hour and vanish, only to resurface in another state a day later. The conflict reached its peak when the mayor of New York publicly vowed to make the witch pay up. Officials argued that she was a city resident and owed staggering sums. Hetty's response was classic. She claimed her legal residence was Vermont, where taxes were several times lower. To prove this, she undertook grueling trips in old, unheated train cars just to document her presence in another state. She litigated every single dollar of tax claims, hiring an army of lawyers whom she paid less than they could have earned on an ordinary case, simply because, in her view, working for Hetty is an honor. Officials hated her, and tax collectors cursed her name, but ordinary people watched the battle with absolute delight. Hetty Green became a symbol of resistance against the system. She used the law as a shield, finding loopholes that entire legal departments had missed. She lived like a refugee in her own empire. Once, when asked why she didn't buy herself a proper mansion, Hetty replied, "Why do I need a house? So the government knows where to find me and how much to take from me? No, thank you. I prefer to be a shadow." And that shadow cost New York City millions of dollars in lost revenue. In July 1916, at the age of 81, Hetty Green departed this world. They say her final battle took place in the kitchen. She argued so fiercely with a maid about the merits of skimmed milk that her heart simply gave out. Even as she was dying, she was defending her principles of thrift. But the real storm began after her funeral. When the law firms announced the total value of her estate, America held its breath. According to various estimates, Hetty left behind between $100 million and $200 million. In today's money, that would be tens of billions. This entire fortune was divided between her two children, Ned and Sylvia. However, Hetty had failed to account for one thing. Her lifelong habit of living under aliases and hiding assets had created a legal labyrinth. As soon as the news of the inheritance broke, lawsuits came pouring in from every corner of the country. Hundreds of distant relatives, illegitimate children, and victims of her machinations suddenly appeared. One of the longest and most expensive legal battles in U.S. history began. For years, lawyers untangled the web of her holdings. Thousands of plots of land, shares in hundreds of railroads, mortgage deeds, and promissory notes. The greatest irony lay in the fact that her children, Ned and Sylvia, though raised in an atmosphere of monstrous stinginess, had not inherited their mother's talent for accumulation. As soon as Hetty's money fell into their hands, the dam burst. The millions she had amassed by denying herself a crust of bread or a drop of hot water began to slip through her heirs' fingers. Spent on luxury, yachts, and stamp collections. All her life, Hetty Green had built an impregnable fortress of gold, hoping it would stand for centuries. But she forgot that money is a living energy, and as soon as the witch was gone, her empire began to slowly dissolve, becoming prey for the very people she had so utterly despised. If you strip away the dirty dresses and the oatmeal on the radiator from Hetty Green's story, you will see the very foundation of modern value investing. A century before Warren Buffett formulated his rules, the Witch of Wall Street was already putting them into practice. Her philosophy was chillingly simple, yet incredibly difficult to execute. Rule number 1, go against the crowd. Hetty used to say, "I buy when everyone is selling, and I sell when everyone is buying." In 1865, she bought bonds when no one believed in them. In 1907, she held cash when everyone else was drowning in debt. She knew that the crowd is always wrong at the extremes. Rule number 2, time is your greatest ally. Hetty was never a speculator. She was an owner. She could wait decades for a railroad to start turning a profit. She wasn't afraid of temporary market downturns because her assets weren't bought on credit. Patience brings more money than brains. This lesson from Hetty remains relevant even in the age of neural networks. Rule number 3, know what you own. She personally inspected every piece of real estate and every company. She didn't believe in rumors or the advice of experts. Hetty understood the physical essence of business, the land beneath her feet and the rails on the ground. Today, she is called the grandmother of value investing. Her methods, strict frugality, zero debt, and the search for undervalued assets, are the very same tools used to build trillion-dollar empires today. Hetty Green proved that the market is a mechanism for redistributing money from the impatient to the patient. And in this game, she was the absolute champion. If you open the newspapers of the early 20th century, Hetty Green appears as a crazed hag who starves her children and sleeps on sacks of gold. But let's stop for a moment. How much truth is there to these stories? Consider the era. A woman on Wall Street in 1900 was an absurdity. A woman who was wealthier than all the men around her was a threat. The boys' club of financial titans could not forgive Hetty for her independence. Journalists of the time, fed by her competitors, competed to see who could cook up the most sensational story. Yes, she was stingy. But was she a monster? Modern historians are uncovering facts that didn't fit the witch persona. Hetty secretly donated enormous sums to education and medicine, but she did so anonymously. Why? If they find out I have a heart, they'll rip it out along with my purse, she used to say. And what about the story of her son's leg? Biographers have discovered that while Hetty did indeed take her son to a free clinic, it wasn't just out of greed. In those days, medicine was a lottery, and she sincerely believed that public hospitals saw more cases, meaning the doctors there were more experienced. And when the amputation became necessary, she hired the best surgeon in the country and paid for an operation that cost a small fortune. But the newspapers preferred to stay silent about that. The myth of the witch was convenient. It turned her into a caricature, stripping away her humanity and her formidable intellectual power. Today, we understand that Hetty Green was not merely a miser. She was the first woman who refused to play the role of social ornament and built her life strictly by her own rules. She chose to be hated, but free. Hetty Green often said, "I find no pleasure in spending money on myself. My pleasure is seeing it grow." And she experienced that pleasure to the fullest. She died the wealthiest woman on the planet, leaving behind a fortune capable of buying entire cities. But when we look at the final chapter of her journey, a question arises. What kind of life was it? She spent 8 decades in a state of permanent warfare. A war with the tax authorities, a war with her family, a war with her own desires. She denied herself warmth, decent food, and beautiful things, everything that makes life comfortable. Hetty built a golden cage and voluntarily locked herself inside, tossing the key into the murky waters of the Hudson. Her children, Ned and Sylvia, became the primary beneficiaries of this sacrifice. But the irony of fate was merciless. Ned, who had lost a leg due to his mother's stinginess, transformed into the most extravagant spendthrift of his time. He bought estates, yachts, and rare diamonds, as if attempting to heal an old childhood trauma with money. Sylvia, meanwhile, lived a quiet life and bequeathed nearly all of Hetty's fortune to charity. In the end, those millions, over which Hetty Green had trembled for every cent, were scattered across the world. Theaters, libraries, and hospitals she never visited were built with her money. Was she happy? Hetty claimed she was. Money was her only true love. It couldn't betray her, it couldn't go bankrupt, and it always returned her affection. She proved that a woman could be stronger than the system, but the price of that strength was absolute loneliness. The story of the Witch of Wall Street is more than just the biography of a stingy woman. It is a mirror of our world, where we often confuse the means to an end with the end itself. Hetty Green amassed all the gold in the world, Yet she took with her only an old black dress and a reputation that continues to haunt and fascinate us a century later. Money is an excellent servant, but a terrible master, and Hetty Green was the ultimate proof of that.